Spring has sprung and your garden is probably rocking it right now. But if you don't take action, you're probably going to see a dramatic decrease in production within the next 1 to 2 months. May is when we shift our growing conditions and we go from mild nights and warm days to just plain hot. And then come the rains. I'll be sharing 6 exceptional standouts that can take these intense conditions so that they thrive, not just survive. But these specialty crops do need particular timing, so let's get to it so you can get planting. My first pick is a favorite crop of the Caribbean, but here in the US, it is considered a weed by many. Now it does reseed freely, grow quickly, and generally needs no assistance from us. But in my book, that is key to a low maintenance garden. I am talking about callaloo, which is a tender-leafed variety of amaranth. Now this plant can be eaten for the leaves or the grains, as well as cut flowers. But there are some key differences between the different varieties that's worth noting. One thing you need to know is that they have very different growth habits. Callaloo here can grow up to 6 feet tall and is much better suited to raised bed gardens or even planting into our native sandy soil in a food forest-like setting. Whereas Chinese multicolor amaranth is only 6 inches wide and tall and is much better suited to containers, vertical gardens, or small space gardening. The second thing you need to know is that the bugs will find it. Now, it can make it to the point where it's unedible and definitely unsightly, but don't worry. You can simply cut the stalk down a few inches from the top and strip off all of the old, ugly, dying leaves. If you have chickens, feed it to them, and it will push out a bunch of new growth that's tender and bug-free. This can be done multiple times throughout the growing season for continued production. Now this can be cooked like they traditionally do in Jamaica and other islands throughout the Caribbean, but it's often overlooked for its fresh eating ability. I love to substitute this freely as a lettuce in my summer salads. One thing that I started growing, which I never anticipated enjoying, is tea. Now, unfortunately, it's not Camellia sinensis, green tea, that would be lovely, but it's incredibly pest prone here. And in my garden, if it's not easy, it's not happening. But the amount of herbal teas that we can grow here is mind-blowing. I grow tulsi, echinacea, moringa, lemon balm, mint, elderflower, lemongrass, ginger, turmeric, chamomile, fennel, and more. But there is one iconic tea that sells over 1 billion cups a year, which I include in my garden every year. Funny enough, it's known as Florida cranberry and used to be planted as an edible and ornamental hibiscus hedge throughout the state since Florida cracker times in the mid-1700s. Our next pick is roselle, which is the key ingredient in the Celestial Seasons Red Zinger tea, which is how most people have become familiar with this amazing herbal tea. Now, it can be used for so much more than tea, which is something that most people totally overlook. This can be substituted in any recipe that calls for cranberries, cranberry sauce. I even have this awesome quesadilla recipe that uses the roselle with black beans. Delicious. It is in my Rooted in Sunshine cookbook, which is over 50 recipes, all using unique Florida heirloom veggies. If you want to get your own copy, you can head on down to the show notes, and I have both ebook and physical copies available. Roselle can be planted pretty much any time in spring. No matter when you plant it in the spring, it will not start blooming until fall and the days start to shorten. So getting it in and allowing it ample time to grow will set you up for pailfuls of roselle. That's the part we eat. So it will get much bigger than you see here because it is spring while we're filming. So do make sure to give it plenty of room. Since it only produces in fall, you will have to be able to preserve it to use throughout the year. I like to dry mine potentially on screens in the sunshine, but it does have a rather thick flesh, so I find that dehydrating it in a dehydrator or in the oven at a super low temp is much more efficient. This next crop is something that most people in the United States can't grow. Now that's not because it's difficult, it's actually not, it's quite easy and takes care of itself once established, but because it needs such a long, hot growing season. Now there are places all over the US that say, I get plenty hot, but they don't have a long enough growing period. This crop takes 200 days from seed to full maturity. Now this next crop we're talking about is not only edible, but it's also utilitarian. And loofah is an amazing crop that you should definitely grow if you have a long and hot growing season. There was a time when I thought loofah sponge, you know, the kind that comes on a back scratcher stick from Bed Bath & Beyond, and I thought it came from the bottom of the ocean with little fishes swimming around it, and was pretty amazed to find out that it actually is a member of the gourd family and grows on a vine. Now 200 days may sound like an incredibly long time to tie up your valuable garden space, but there are a few things to consider. One is that they don't actually need to go in the garden bed. They don't need nutrient-dense soil and do just fine once established in our native sandy soils. Two is that they can be trellised. They're a vine. They prefer to grow up. So if you want to save space from going out, just go up. And the third thing is one of these plants will almost for sure produce enough squash for you to consume for the entire summer, plus all of your sponge needs for the entire year off of one plant. So far we have talked about tea and veggies and even household products, but we haven't really hit on anything that's calorically dense. So regardless of whether you're a backyard gardener, a homesteader, or a prepper, everybody should be growing this amazing crop here in Florida. The weird thing about this one is it's not actually grown from seeds or cuttings. So how the heck do you grow it? You grow it from slips, which of course means we're talking about sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes are the nutrient-dense powerhouses you're never going to be able to get rid of. Every year when I pull out my sweet potato patch in fall, I invariably miss a few pieces of root or vine. And next spring, they pop right back up. Now this could seem like a problem, but it's not, because you simply go over to the plants and vines as they pop up, tug them out of the ground, and you've got yourself a new sweet potato slip to take and plant in whatever new location you want your sweet potatoes in. It's something that you invest in one time and you have forever. We have found Tannung 64 to do the best here on our homestead, but we also really like Murasaki and Beauregard as alternatives, and we grow all three of them regularly. Now, I usually hear from clients and students two big issues with sweet potatoes. One, they don't taste sweet, and two, they don't produce large roots. If they aren't tasting sweet, it's because you didn't cure them. Make sure to leave them for a couple of weeks before eating for them to sweeten up. Now the other part, the roots, could be because you didn't wait long enough. They take 6 to 9 months to produce, which is a pretty long growing season. So if you don't put them in until early summer, they may not be ready in the fall. The other thing that can affect root production is the amount of nitrogen in the soil. You may make the assumption that these need lots of nutrients because they're going to be growing you nice big roots, but it's actually the opposite. Too much nitrogen can lead to small roots and lots of leafy green growth. Now, the leaves are edible, but most people aren't going for the leaves. It's just a happy byproduct. So if you want large roots, make sure to plant in sandy soil with a little bit of mulch on top, and you will be amazed at the production. If you've followed the channel for any length of time, you've probably realized that I pick some rather oddball vegetables that aren't super common here in the US. Many of them hail from Mexico, the Caribbean, or even Southeast Asia. This pick is actually from Africa because it has a very similar growing condition for the season that we're heading into, which is hot and wet. My next pick is Egyptian spinach, and I tend to overplant it every single year. Not because we don't eat it, but because it produces so much on one plant. One plant can easily meet my family's needs for leafy greens throughout the summer months. Now this can be eaten raw, in smoothies, in salads, as an addition to callaloo or some of the amaranth and summer leafy greens that you can grow. But it can also be cooked. In northern Africa, they'll make it into a delicious stew with chicken and rice. It's absolutely magical. But this bush does also have another really appealing characteristic, and that is the fact that it can grow in full sun in summer here in Florida. Not many leafy greens can meet those growing conditions. Now it does get pretty large, so one plant is likely more than enough for you. It gets to be about 4 foot tall or so and that wide. Now the reason mine gets that big is because in the beginning of the planting season, when it reaches maybe 2 feet or so, I top it off and I cut those first few inches off of the plant. When I do that, it forces the plant to bush out and produce more leafy green growth from that point on. My last pick for May is related to something we've already talked about, the roselle. But luckily, we aren't going to have to wait that long for their gorgeous blooms to start producing. This one will go all summer long. Now it is a love it or hate it pick. I happen to be in the love it camp, but hear me out. This vegetable is an amazing powerhouse of nutrients. It has really, really healthful, beneficial effects on your gut and digestion. It's known to be really good for pregnant mothers to use. It has effects on heart health, so if you're sensitive in that arena, this is a wonderful addition to your diet. Now, some people do find it a little bit slimy and unappealing, but if you have never tried okra as anything other than gumbo, I'm about to blow your mind. Now, I happen to love it as okra chips. They have zero, I repeat, zero slime to them when you bake them that way. So you take it, you slice it thin, you put a little bit of olive oil on it, some seasonings like a bagel seasoning or garlic, put it in the oven and bake it until it starts to go golden and just a tiny bit black. They are so delicious. They typically don't make it to the dinner table before we have them scarfed down. Now there are all different ways you can make it, fried or in stews, which I happen to love all of. But if you have never tried them as okra chips and you don't think you like okra, I would highly, highly recommend you trying them that way before making your final decision. There are tons of different varieties of okra out there. Clemson Spineless is the tried and true. I like bowling red. It makes visualizing and seeing the pods as they develop really, really easy. Burmese is a great variety for those who are working in small spaces or container. It's a dwarf variety of okra. But my personal favorite is Gold Coast okra. It has a really well-developed root system, so it's really drought and water resistant, and it also is resistant to nematodes. If you've ever grown this crop and failed, I can almost guarantee you it was due to nematode damage to the root systems. Okra is really, really sensitive to this. So planting Gold Coast is really helpful, but if you really want to figure out how to defeat these garden villains, make sure to check out this video next.